Hello, this is Michael, atheist and alcoholic. I'm attempting 90 AA meetings in 90 days. Nothing discussed in these videos will ever violate the anonymity of AA. So, directly headed out of today's meeting, I got into my car and Deicide started blasting Lunatic of God's Creation. I found some irony in that. In really focusing on reading the big book, the chapter to atheist agnostics, reading it very carefully, I was a little worried that it was going to detract from the meetings, that I was going to be less open-minded and able to get what I could from them. But so far that hasn't been the case. They seem to be discreet enough that Christians have a saying, hate the sin and not the sinner. I love the twist on that, hate the belief and not the believer. And that's something I've taken to heart over the years. It's not like I haven't learned anything of importance from my religious friends on how to live a better life outside of AA. So far, the profound points of departure I have from the philosophy of AA that become more apparent reading through the big book are not taking away from what I can get out of the meetings. I'm also a bit conflicted. There is an impulse to just go through at least this chapter almost paragraph by paragraph, partly so it doesn't seem like I'm cherry picking and taking things out of context. It's not a long chapter, but doing that will take most of the 90 days, and that's not even getting into the steps or anything, so I don't know how that's going to go. Right now, I am just going to go basically paragraph by paragraph. I'm going to try to abbreviate it where possible. I thought about just putting the text into the description, so it would be right there. I don't know if I would run into copyright violations doing that. So for now, I'm just going to read what's in the book and then my reaction to it, and then discuss the daily meeting. So the author states, "We found that as soon as we were able to lay aside prejudice and express even a willingness to believe in a power greater than ourselves, we commenced to get results. Even though it was impossible for any of us to fully define or comprehend that power, which is God, much to our relief, we discovered we did not need to consider another's conception of God. Our own conception, however inadequate, was sufficient to make the approach and to effect contact with Him. As soon as we admitted the possible existence of a creative intelligence, a spirit of the universe underlying the totality of things, we began to be possessed of a new sense of power and direction, provided we took other simple steps. When therefore we speak to you of God, we mean your own conception of God. This applies too to other spiritual expressions which you find in this book. Do not let any prejudice you may have against spiritual terms deter you from honestly asking yourself what they mean to you. At the start, this was all we needed to commence spiritual growth, to effect our first conscious relation with God as we understood Him. Afterward, we found ourselves accepting many things which then seemed entirely out of reach. That was growth. But if we wished to grow, we had to begin somewhere. So we used our own conception, however limited it was." So far as I can tell, there's not really an argument being made there, just a claim that if you accept a higher power in whatever limited way you're able to do it, you will get results, provided you take other simple steps. And again, the steps are what I found compelling about AA, the structure of them. And there are a buddy brought this up to me the other day. In addition to smart recovery, there are other iterations of AA. There's a Buddhist one. There's another humanist one I'll get into in another video. I want to give that time to discuss that one. So there's other iterations of AA that are more secular in nature, that still do the 12 steps. But the claim, I mean, that it sounds to me like brainwashing, um, making these claims, promising results to somebody who's in a very desperate state, promising that they're going to believe something they don't currently believe, a supernatural force. I remember before I started, I don't know if I brought this up in another video, but before I started this program, these videos, I was talking to a friend about doing this, and I told her that, you know, AA is at least a cult that tries to do good for people. And she pushed back. She's neither religious nor an alcoholic or an addict, but she pushed back and said that, well, one of the primary things that a cult does is it isolates people from their friends and family, and AA definitely doesn't do that. And she's right. So, might not meet the exact criteria for a cult, but definitely cult-ish in nature. Tomorrow we'll get into, he tries to make arguments scientifically to prove the existence of a higher power. I'll get into that tomorrow. So today was day 17, and the topic was on expectations. There were good shares. Mine was a reiteration of something I've talked about before. It bears repeating because if anybody happens to watch this early in sobriety, it may be helpful. But my pattern, as I've mentioned many times, was long periods of sobriety followed by relapses that continue to escalate in spite of how much sober time, continuous sober time that preceded. So I unfortunately had many opportunities to rebuild trust and manage expectations. So resonant with serenity prayer, I learned that the only thing, or accepted the only thing that I could control was that I had to do the next right thing. I had to do what was required to build the trust, completely independent with how my family would react to it, because that was completely out of my control. And it didn't matter. I still had to do the next right thing and just focus on that. And over time, something approximating wisdom, to know the difference between what I could control and what I couldn't in that situation, was beaten through my thick skull. And not long ago, I had the opportunity to acknowledge growth in myself. My better half went out of town, and I could tell before doing so she was worried. And I am as close to a relapse, as close to zero as I could possibly be. But instead of resenting her for being worried, I was like, oh no, that makes sense. And I think that for the rest of our lives, if she worries when she goes out of town and I'm left to my own devices for a few days, that is perfectly reasonable. So that's all I have for today. Thank you very much, and I will see you all here again tomorrow.